And now, it's time for TJwow.
Hello everybody and welcome to the Training Journal webinar. We are so pleased that you are here with us today. This is me, I'm the Deputy Editor of TJ. My name is Jo Cook. You've probably seen me before and you've certainly, if you've been here before, you've heard me before. So I'm really looking forward to having a great conversation with everybody today. And conversation, as you know, is the most powerful learning technology of all, as says the late Jay Cross. And so what we really want to do in our session today, and if you've been here before you know, it's all about the conversation. So we don't have any PowerPoints, we don't have any prepared stuff going on other than our opening question. And our opening question is all about empathy and does that actually impact our business results? That's our question today. And the rest of it, well, that is entirely up to you. You've got the chat window. Use that to chat with each other. Use that also, what you can do is share links. You can share any kind of blogs that you've got references to of yours or anybody else's if you want to. You can also ask questions in the chat window, or we do have a chat pod. So if you want to absolutely 1,000,000% make sure that I'm not going to miss your question, you can use the chat pod. But I promise I will also keep an eye on that chat window as well. Okay then, so on Twitter we've got John Kennard, our lovely, wonderful, illustrious editor, and he will be tweeting on #TJwow. So perhaps you go out and do that a little bit as well today if you want to. Just share a couple of ideas, a couple of thoughts that you have, and what it is that people are wanting to learn from you and your summary of what we're doing. We've got our recording available and all our previous recordings all completely free and available on the Training Journal website. And I think at this point you've heard more than enough from me. So I think what we need to do is get our speakers online and find out a little bit about them. We have Nicky, no we don't have Nicky, sorry, we have Nicky, Stephanie and Phil. That's who we have. They are absolutely passionate and knowledgeable and experienced on this topic. So get your questions and your thoughts and your comments ready. So what we're going to do now, let's get our videos on screen so that you can see them live as it actually happens. Here they all are. And what we're going to do is just have some brief introductions from them. So we're going to go to Phil first, then Stephanie, then Nicky, and just find out a little bit about who they are and what they do, and then we'll go into thinking about that first question about empathy. So Phil, let's get you unmuted and find out who on earth are you?
Hi everybody, I'm Phil Wilcox. I love ice cream. That's a big thing for me. I especially like a Mr. Whippy 99 with a flake. Love that. And also anything involving emotion is my bag, whether that be what happens within people, what happens between people in relationships, or what happens in organisations as a whole. But my lens on all of the work that I do has an emotion-based one around it, hence my interest in empathy.
That's brilliant, thank you. I really like that you kind of bring all of these different things together. Thank you, Phil. And Stephanie, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you...
Well, I work for Braylano Learning and we design and deliver blended learning solutions, and at the heart of all of that are people and the way that they turn up at work and the way that they operate. So for me, empathy is a core part of that, and I've had a personal particular interest in empathy ever since I was burgled a very long time ago, and everybody I told about my burglary had a better burglary than me. They were not really interested in my burglary. And if they didn't have their own burglary, they would relate a story about someone they knew or they'd read in the paper. So I think that empathy is something that people intuitively do on occasions, but quite often their work head and everything else gets in the way. So I think it's something definitely worth talking about.
Absolutely, and I don't really want to know any more about your burglary because last week what I heard was, no, I'm not doing that. Okay, thank you, Stephanie. I think you're going to bring some really interesting stuff to the conversation. And Nicky, let's get you unmuted. And Nicky, tell us a little bit about what it is that you do as well. So Nicky, I'll unmute you, Nicky. Don't worry, that we can do that. There we go. You're unmuted, Nicky. So tell us a little bit about what you do.
My name's Nicky. I'm the Managing Director of the Learning Curve, and we specialise in bespoke leadership development, one-to-one and team coaching. And we're very passionate about emotions like Phil and their impact on people and relationships. And one of our core ways of thinking in TLC is about conscious leadership. And that's about how our behaviour and emotions impact not only ourselves, but people we work with and the organisation as a whole, which drives business results. So compassion is a word I will use probably more than empathy, because for me empathy is very important, but to me compassion is empathy in action. I'd like to share that a little bit later on as we carry on with the webinar.
Thank you, Nicky. Yeah, so some interesting different ways of looking at that. So we've got 3 really interesting speakers, all with different kind of accents, if you like, or takes on the subject. So what we need to know from you guys is what your thoughts are and what your questions are. Now, there's some stuff going on in the chat window already. Phil had asked about what people think, and Bethany had said it depends on where the empathy is located and what we mean by empathy and the action from empathy, perhaps, which is a little bit about what Nicky was saying just there. And so to clarify that a little bit more, Bethany says one can be empathetic and yet not allow that to reflect in their action or treatment of others. So Phil, you started that question. Let's come to you first and then maybe Nicky, because you talked about that kind of in action. So Phil, what are your thoughts on that opening element?
So I was curious by when Bethany said where the empathy is located. Because there's a researcher called Mark Davis who his kind of research started back in the 1980s. 1983 was his first kind of, I guess, his seminal paper, if you want to describe it in that way. And he talked initially about 3 types of empathy. So he talked about cognitive empathy, which is I can think about how it might, if I can use Stephanie's example, if that's right, Stephanie, I can think about what it might feel like to have been burgled. I then can have personal sort of distress empathy, which is where I feel the emotions that Stephanie may have felt at that particular time. And then I can have affective empathy, which is where I can sort of demonstrate that I feel I can understand the ways that and how Stephanie might have felt, and I might sort of start to feel it as well. But what he talks about was different types of empathy. So there's one which is, yeah, I get it. One which is I'm feeling it intently, and the other one which is I'm engaging with that, and I can feel how you feel. So he talks about 3 different types of empathy, and I think that might be what Bethany's playing with in terms of the. So she said, what she said. One can be empathic and yet not allow that to reflect in their action or treatment of others. So I maybe unfairly, but I might say, well, that sounds like cognitive empathy. I say, yeah, I can understand how you would feel like that, but then that doesn't affect them as an individual and therefore doesn't affect their actions. But it might be, Nicky might have something to add to that.
Okay, and I think also what might be quite interesting in there is that sometimes that could be a good thing, so that we don't overuse our emotions, don't get emotionally drained, maybe. I don't know, but we can come back to that. But Nicky, what are your thoughts on that point about empathy in action? Because you mentioned that in your opening as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, to me, empathy is our ability to emotionally feel how someone else is feeling, and you're right about affective and cognitive empathy. But for me, compassion is empathy in action, and by that I mean it's about it's a firm commitment characterised by action that expects nothing in return. It's an authentic, genuine desire to help and to be supportive in a very healthy way. So for me, empathy is important, but without compassion, that authentic, unconditional love, in one way, I'd like to put it, desire to support and help someone to do something different. I want to quote something by Stephen Covey, which I love. Stephen Covey said it's about giving a person psychological air, and after that vital need is met, you can then focus on being creative, influencing and problem solving. So it's taking that to the next stage. I think that's important.
Yeah, really interesting, that point about creative air. I'm hearing that as sort of space to explore, to think, to feel, and to be allowed to have those emotions. And so the conversation is going on in the chat window, and Phil shared a link to that. So Stephanie, Phil used your example of the burglary. So what is it that you're thinking about, kind of where the empathy sits and what people do with that?
Well, I think a number of interesting points have been raised, and I think it is important that we protect ourselves from being in empathy mode all of the time. Otherwise, we will be awash with everybody else's emotions, because I think it can be infectious if you let yourself open to other people's feelings. I love the fact that compassion is a demonstration of empathy and that it's something that you bring out. But for me, the point that Phil was making about, I think you used the word cognitive. I can't read the chat as quickly as all you can. I think that's what he said. For me, that feels that it almost potentially is lip service. So I've heard what you've said. I haven't got time to take that all on board. So yada, yada, yada. And for me, it's about authenticity. So if you genuinely care about someone and you genuinely want to work with them and do the best with them, then you sometimes have to slow down and allow a bit of that emotion to impact you in a way. So you can feel it. You can protect yourself, but you can feel it to a degree. And then you can be compassionate. Whereas if you've not allowed that time or effort to tap into that, then almost compassion, it like can't happen. You've already stopped it. And if you do try to be compassionate in those circumstances, then people feel that what's the word? You're not incongruence. They feel it, and that almost equals inauthenticity, and then their guard goes up a little bit more. So whereas they might have shared this time, they're less likely to next time. And so I think that's quite a dangerous road to get down, especially if you're building relationships and want good relationships.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges we can have as colleagues, as managers, as partners, as friends, is that we can hear something that's quite emotive for someone and actually be almost dismissive of it and move on from that without necessarily kind of taking on board the full impact of that emotion. But if we're looking at this then from a business perspective, how does all of this relate to business results and to performance results? So we know it's really important, but how is it going to work in the workplace? So let's start with Phil and then maybe move to Nicky and then Stephanie.
So how does it link? It's for me, the link is unequivocal. So if we want to be successful in the workplace, and granted, at some point in the future we may have a workplace full of robots, but right now we don't. We have a workplace full of people. And if you have a workplace full of humans, then that brings emotions, and therefore, if you're not engaging on an empathic level, if you're not, even if you're not able to cognitively understand, even if you were to do the smallest, which is cognitive empathy, which is, so if I send this communication, how might that make people feel? So if I'm going to make this announcement or send this email or raise this point, how might that affect other people? So at a minimum, if I do some cognitive empathy, I've got to be doing that to think, well, how might that be for them? How might that work for them? What I find really interesting, though, in that is that a lot of the research that's done focuses on specific contexts. So it looks at empathy in sales or empathy in leadership or empathy in customer service or empathy in those different settings. So what the research is lacking in a way is a holistic pan-organisation view. And the reason for that is because that would be a massively complex study. So this is one of the challenges with kind of real life and some of the academic research. And what the academic research says, in multiple contexts, empathy is an enabler of performance, or empathy is highly correlated with high performance, whether it be in sales or leadership or customer service or whatever that might be. What it doesn't do is necessarily say, and then you can generalize that out bigger and broader, because that would be like a massive study. So for me, the links are unequivocal. Absolutely, it drives business performance and it drives business results. It can enable them, and lack of it can hinder them. But for me, there's also a gap in the research because it's all focused in on or zones in on particular aspects.
Okay, so it's kind of interesting that it's unequivocal in some ways, because it's just like we all know that if you don't have certain, let's call it emotional intelligence, for the want of a label, then that can really affect working relationships. But then, how do we link that to the business results that are more tangible? So there's an interesting kind of step here. Nicky, what are your thoughts about this and how you see?
Well, I completely agree with you, Phil. There's an absolute direct link to business results. I think it's a no-brainer, personally and professionally, having worked in many businesses. So the way I look at it is, I look at the stats that are out there. So workplace absence is costing the UK economy £18 billion a year, set to rise to 21 billion. And if you look at the research, it's saying that a lot of that is down to mental health issues. And 1 in 6 people have mental health issues. So if you think about it, if you're a leader, a big leader with a team of 600, 100 of your people could have mental health issues. And also 64% of people feel overwhelmed at work. And if you think about it, there's a lot of carers who are working and also caring. So there's 6.5 million carers in the UK. Half, 3.25 million, are actually caring for people as well as working. And the research is telling us that of those 3.25 million, 75% say that caring and working impacts their business performance. So if we have leaders who don't have empathy and compassion, who don't play their part in managing that in the workplace, I think that has a massive impact on business. So for me, it's about developing people's emotional awareness, about their behaviour, how it impacts themselves, how they show up, the shadow that they cast, and also how that impacts colleagues that they work with and the business, which I mentioned earlier. And having empathy and compassion enables us to have those conversations that matter. Because if we're not empathetic and compassionate, we disconnect from somebody else. When we disconnect, we're saying in some respects, I don't care, you're not important. And I think that one of the core characteristics of our conscious leadership model is compassion. And to me, compassion and empathy are fundamental for business results, because without them, then we can't play our part in workplace absence, people feeling overpowered. I mean, 1 in 3 prescriptions are related to mental health prescriptions. So it's in our environment. We've all been stressed and anxious at some time. It's a normal part of life. So empathy and compassion, I think, makes a fundamental difference to how people feel, how they connect, and how they then perform. So to me, it's a no-brainer, and I'm very passionate about it, as you can tell.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I can see is Jane in the chat window, for instance, is saying those are very thought-provoking statistics for all business leaders. So what I'm wondering is, if we have this information to hand, what is the next step? How do we enable people? How do we help people? How do we, do we need to prove the business results so that we can, do we need to sell a course in empathy? Is it more challenging than that, because it's something that should feed through everything that we do? Stephanie, what's your take on this, and how are you seeing this, especially with your clients, for instance, that are coming to Braylano? How are you dealing with empathy in those kind of projects that you're working on?
Well, in lots of different ways, I think, is the straightforward answer to that. But so for me, this is all about self-awareness and emotional intelligence, as we talked about, and authenticity. So in quite a lot of our leadership programs, we're looking at helping people understand what it is. What I find intriguing is that people can be quite empathic outside of work, but they turn it off when they get to work. And that's sometimes more than about an individual. That's about a culture, and that's about the way organizations are running their businesses. So I'm sure if we think of some of the headline companies, there are some companies where you would not reveal anything about yourself in the workplace. So just training managers to be more empathic is not going to work. So I think this is more than the sum of the parts sometimes. This is board driven. Some of the things that we do is we use horses in some of our leadership programs. We do some coaching with horses, because they are very perceptive and receptive to how people are turning up. So that's not just about what they say and what they do, it's about how they are presenting themselves. And that can be an absolute revelation to people who think that they're doing empathy, or they think that they are behaving in a way that should engage people, where actually they haven't. But we use lots of other methods as well. So, for example, we come from a marketing perspective when we're looking at engaging people. So we're looking all the time at standing in other people's shoes, because if you can't understand what makes people tick, then you can't hook them into the learning that you're trying to provide. So there's a huge amount of information about empathy and advertising and marketing.
Yeah, it's interesting when we're thinking about kind of how animals respond to our more, I don't want to say basic emotions, but they can respond to things in a way that humans may choose or edit not to. And I think that's kind of really interesting. When I first heard about it, I'll be honest, I kind of went, horse whisperer, coaching, really, I'm not sure about this. But actually, I was chatting to somebody about it and could really understand a lot more about why you would do that and the impact it can have. So I do get that. Okay, and what have we got going on in the chat window? So Olivia, I'll come back to your question in a moment.
Can I just pick up on a couple of things? Is that all right? So, I think that so Stephanie made a really important point about how the credibility of these things in the workplace. You know, so I talk a lot about, you know, for me, there's three worlds that I play in that overlap. So those worlds are emotion, credibility, and deception. So the reason I play in those worlds in this context in particular then is, so if I'm a manager or I'm an individual and I want to open up about how I'm feeling, whether it be linking back to some of Nicky's points about if I'm a carer, or if I'm struggling with anxiety or depression or stress or whatever that might be. If the culture is one where discussing those things will harm my credibility, they'll harm my reputation, they'll harm my how my performance is assessed, how I'm viewed by other people, then I will then start to hide that. And this is where it then tips into that deception one, because what then happens is I start to hide things. I push things down, I put it away, and so being empathic, what that can allow to happen is to allow what's being hidden to be shown or let out. And Stephanie talked about an example that, you know, that stuff that's being hidden could be let out through the use of horses or other animals. And I think one of the challenges we have is the context that we explore these things in. So I remember doing a leadership program a few years ago where in the room, people could be vulnerable, empathic, they could share what's happening, share what's going on, and the quality of the conversation. So we come back to Nicky said about what was it? Conversations that matter. In the room, the conversations that matter were amazing. But what I found out halfway through the program was those conversations that matter only ever took place in the room. They didn't take place back at desk. They didn't take place in the office. They didn't take place in the context of the workplace. And that for me was a massive learning to go, you know what, we've got to do more because we've made it credible here. So in this context, we've made that conversations that matter credible, but in the workplace, they are not. So we had to do more then to think, well, what do we need to do systemically within the organization to allow those conversations to move from being credible here to also being credible here in the workplace as well. So I don't know, I wang on about context a lot, but that for me is one of those things that we can create context where those conversations can happen and work and be successful. But then when you move it to other places or to other people, then that can be much more difficult.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. And whilst we, do kind of have a laugh sometimes about Phil's favourite word is context, it is really, really important. And I love the point you make about we've made it safe here, we've made it acceptable to be able to do this. But how can you make that translate, almost transfer back into the workplace, which is a perennial issue. So let's come to Stephanie and then Nicky on those thoughts of how have you enabled that, or what struggles have you had? And in the chat window, have you had similar problems, or have you had successes that you can share, or insight around that? So Stephanie first, so let's pick up that thread around how you go from, we've done this in a program or a training course or a coaching session, how do we have that wider business impact?
Well, I think starting with the top, some organisations want to go from the bottom up, but I think that's just because they are delegating what is actually their responsibility. And quite frankly, I think that, especially if you've got any sort of command control culture, even if it's a legacy thing, then that is never, ever, ever going to work. So I think it is starting from the top. I think we need role models. And I think that the context that Phil talks about, if we can get senior people making it that safe to share in their team meetings, in the way that they turn up, then that will have an impact over time. But I think time is really important. So if you haven't trusted someone, even if that's your mindset outside of the organisation, so if you haven't got trust, then it takes a long time to build up trust. And I think we've all heard the old phrase about having a trust bank. You can put stuff in the bank and it can take quite a while, but one thing can just decimate your account. One bad decision, one bad comment, one flippant remark, and you've lost it all. So it isn't something that can be done quite quickly. So it does need commitment and determination, I think, from senior teams. And I think some of the work that Julian Stodd talks about, so in terms of bringing everything out into the open, we've done that with some organisations where we've helped them have a voice and make it okay to speak. As even a first step, without even getting as far as empathy. So being okay to share your opinion, removing some of the barriers and hierarchy from conversations.
I think you've got some great points there, and so much of what we talk about in learning and development, organisational development, HR, it comes back to culture, and it comes also back to the senior leadership team and how they set the scene, set the tone, and kind of get going on those things. So Nicky, let's come to you with your thoughts on this about how do we make the transition perhaps from what we've done in that training program, the classroom.
I agree with you, Phil. It's a systemic challenge in organisations, and the way we work in TLC is that our work is very much around cultural readiness. So we'll do a lot of work and invest when we work with an organisation on a culture change programme or leadership programme to understand their culture. And I use the analogy of the goldfish in the goldfish bowl. When the goldfish are the leaders, and the water that people are swimming in is the culture. So if you take the goldfish out of the goldfish bowl, give them a bit of a polish and put them back in, and the water they're swimming in is contaminated, it's dirty, it's not okay to speak up, it's not okay to be vulnerable, then nothing's going to change. So what we do, the work is very much around getting the culture ready for what it is that we are going to be doing in terms of a change. So that is fundamentally how we work. I think that's the first point. And I think it is about the shadows that leaders cast. It's very important about developing emotional intelligence, because self-awareness is where empathy and compassion can thrive and can succeed. It's also about the kinds of conversations that we have, the leadership conversations that people have. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to say what you want to say. It's okay to be open and honest. It's okay to be you. And then it's also about the trust, constantly building trust. 28% of leaders don't trust their immediate boss, and 46% don't trust the senior leaders in an organisation. So Stephanie's talking about trust being so important, which it is. So in order to have this culture of where empathy and compassion can thrive, it's also about creating an environment of trust. So leaders constantly building trust. And then as well, it's about, I think, how leaders manage their energy. So we call it purposeful energy. So if I manage my energy, I'm uplifting, I manage my emotions, that also impacts culture. So if I'm stressed, and my energy is not being managed, that's not going to help empathy and compassion in others, is it? Then we also need to take time out to reflect and to pause and to recharge ourselves, to be focused in our attention. I think all of those things in a culture, for a leader to be outstanding, to do all of those things, I think means that they can be compassionate, and I think that will make a difference.
Absolutely, and I think it has such wide-ranging implications when you have an off day or you have an on day, and about everything that goes on around you. So we've got a story that Olivia has shared in the chat window. So Olivia, thank you so much for sharing this. I just want to read this out and get some thoughts and reactions to this. So I'll come to Phil first, then Stephanie, then Nicky on this. Olivia says, I'd like to share how the lack of empathy affected me at work, where I had been for years. I consider myself a highly sensitive person, an introvert. On the top of it all, I'm a thin, stereotypically quiet and withdrawn people. I need to work uninterrupted and in solitude. When I have that, I am a super deliverer. Policy changed and I could no longer work from home twice a week. My then boss was empathetic and let me know she really understood my struggles, but policy prevented me from working from home. Thanks to her empathy, I stayed and did my best. Then I got a new boss who lacked empathy and made me feel like there was a weakness in my character. Within weeks, I changed jobs. I believe empathy, or the lack thereof, was the crucial factor. So Olivia, thank you so much. That's been really open and honest, and thank you so much for sharing that with us. And Bethany says it's a huge factor for a lot of people. And also Phil had asked, how are you feeling during those weeks between the boss changing and leaving? I bet there was a huge amount of stress there. And Olivia says, I felt unseen, not understood, and even discriminated against. Also very angry towards both my boss and the whole organisation, thinking that if all had the same circumstances, we'd deliver equally. So Phil, let's come to you first on this. And what are your thoughts about, firstly, Olivia's experience, but also then kind of broadening that out to the discussion we're having about
I think
impact?
Olivia's experience is, sadly to say, common in that. So I talk about the illusion of control a lot. That we have this illusion that we want to be in control of stuff and we just aren't. But if we give, I guess it links into presenteeism and other aspects within it as well. But for me, it's where I'm going to link it to is the worlds of emotional labour and emotion work. So emotional labour is the challenges that the self-regulation and self-management work that we have to do to work with our own emotions. And then emotion work is where we have to work with and support other people and other people's emotions. And what we have an example here is an individual, or the line manager in particular, who wasn't doing emotion work. They weren't engaging with and supporting Olivia with the emotional challenges that she was facing, which was in contrast to the previous boss who said, I can't change the policy, but I can at least understand where you're coming from and I can adapt some of my approaches to meet that. And I think one of the challenges we have in the workplace is we don't give individuals and/or managers the skills or the time to do emotional labour or to do emotion work. So if I was to go into an office and say, I just need half an hour before our meeting because right now, like, I'm feeling frustrated or annoyed or whatever that might be, and I just want to settle that down so I can be wholly attentive in the meeting. Most people, in my experience, would go, "Come on, get along to the meeting and let's get on with it." And what we don't do is provide that time and space or strategies for individuals to work with their own emotions, but also then equip other people to support them with that. And this is where I'm going to then link it back to compassion and empathy in business performance. So what you've got in Olivia's story is somebody who left, who's someone who described themselves as a super deliverer and left. And that in itself is a indicator of performance and how a lack of empathy will then inhibit or negatively affect performance of either an individual in this case and/or potentially a team and/or the organisation.
some really interesting themes to pull out there, Phil. Thank you. We've got some chat going on here as well. And Olivia responds and says, I consider a manager's job is primarily to help staff deliver and feel good enough about doing it to stay in the firm. My new boss actually told me if I delivered less and felt worse, that was okay. Her response was to lower my ambitions. And Olivia, I really feel for you. That's horrible. And as somebody who's a super deliverer, and I think a lot of people on the webinar today and our speakers would probably put themselves in that category as well, to be told it's okay if you do less is just makes me feel like a dagger to the heart or something like that. Stephanie, let's come to you on this story and the wider implications, and then Nick.
I know this happens all of the time, but when you hear a heartfelt story, it still shocks me, and it pains me in a way that people have any sort of experience like Olivia's. So, and I guess sometimes when it's happening to you, you feel a little bit.
Ooh, have we lost Stephanie?
Well, in the wrong.
Stephanie, we might have lost you. I think we have. So Stephanie's we've lost for a moment, but don't worry, we'll come back to Stephanie in just a moment. She's obviously having some technical problems. So Stephanie, we'll leave you to just. Oh, Stephanie, we're going to come back to you in a moment. So Nicky, let's come to you on Olivia's story, and just think about kind of first of all for Olivia's experience, but also more broadly for leadership.
I am sorry that happened to Olivia, and I think you're absolutely right in your comment when you say that you consider a manager's job is primarily to help staff deliver and feel good enough to do it in that organisation. I think that is just so spot on. The definition of compassion, one that I've just want to share with you, is that when we talk about compassion, we say so conscious leaders show compassion connection with intent to contribute to the well-being and fulfillment of their people. So I think a leader's role, as Simon Sinek will tell us, is to be of service to the people who work with us. I absolutely agree with that. And there's another quote I want to give you, which I need to find. It's by a leader called Bill Drayton. He's one of the top 25 US leaders. And he said this, 21st century leaders need to master the skills that allow us to appreciate the perspective of others and understand deeply how our own decisions either enable or block the goals of those with whom we connect. And he calls that mastering empathy and compassion. So for me, it's really hard to find good staff, and to lose someone, I think, is a shame. And then the commercial cost of business to replace is high. So, I just believe that a leader's role is fundamentally about compassion and other things I've shared too, about the fulfillment and well-being of their people. Because so everybody's an individual and needs to be treated as an individual, respected and honoured as an individual. And as a business context, a leader has to manage as well, as running as well as being empathetic. But I think that can easily be managed and can be led well. And I think that and I think it's a shame. And I hear those stories, and I just think if we can create, compassion, empathy is contagious. It is, and it elevates the mood. So if people were more compassionate and more empathetic in business, you would elevate the mood, and it's contagious. Research will tell us that it's contagious. So it's a shame.
Yeah, absolutely. And Olivia said, good quote on what you read out there, Nicky. And I always remember years and years ago, my middle brother, Lewis, got his tongue pierced. And we spent the entire day with my grandmother and she hadn't noticed. And right at the end of the day, I said, are you going to show your grandmother what you've done? He poked his tongue out and my grandmother went, oh, like this was her initial reaction. But then she thought for just a second and she said, the thing is with having modern grandchildren is that you have to be a modern grandparent. And I think that is really what we're looking at here with our leaders, is maybe the way that leaders were with them 10, 20, 30 years ago in their growth up to where they are now isn't appropriate in a modern work environment, in the modern world that we've got. So welcome back, Stephanie. Hopefully we don't have too many technical problems. Let's come to you on this point about Olivia's...
Okay, well, Nicky might have said some of this, so apologies if you have, Nicky. For me, it's all about people, as I said right at the very beginning, and I think that old cliche that people leave managers, not organisations, is just proven in Olivia's story. And I also think it's about positive things as well. So it's not just about negative emotions. It's about people usually want to do the best they can, and to imply to anyone not to do that is such an affront to their values that you're at a whole different level of offensiveness now. So to say don't do your best is just like, really? You know, you're offending me now. You've taken this way too far. So I think that probably hooked something in Olivia. It definitely would have hooked something in me. So I often use the phrase that managers are our secret sauce. They are they're the key that can unlock all of the potential, because in small teams you can make a big difference. It's when we talk organisationally, that's much more difficult to do. But I see managers as sort of managing a flotilla of small ships, and you can turn that more agilely rather than being a captain of a great big tanker. And if you want to turn that around, it's much more difficult. So this is what greases the engine: empathy, and compassion and people. So that definitely equal business results, and Olivia's story proves that. I think without a shadow of a doubt. Yeah, so I've lost track a little bit because I lost my signal. Have empathy for me. I need it.
No, I think what you said there is absolutely perfect. And
Love
you're
that.
sharing in the chat window the researchers Brown and Levinson said that people have face wants to be approved of and to be unimpeded. And I might be misquoting very slightly, but you'll get the gist of what I'm saying. The recent research on Towards Maturity had found, you know, they'd asked people basically, what do you want? And something like 76% of people said, I just want to do my job well, which really links in with what Phil was saying. I was just like, just get out of the way and let people do what they do really well in the way that's going to be working for them. And Olivia says, thank you all for the responses and commentary. With the compassion you've all demonstrated, not only did I get a learning experience, but also a wee therapy session. Oh, Olivia, I will speak for everyone to say it's our pleasure, and we will give you a big virtual hug because I think we would have hated to have been in that position ourselves. What we're going to do now is go into some reflection time and think about kind of what is it that we've been through, a therapy session such as this, and what is it that we're going to take away and do differently. So our speakers are definitely staying here. We're definitely still talking to them, but we're going to come off of webcam now. So let's just wave a webcam goodbye, and then we will move into our reflection. So let's just practice some tools that we've got for our reflection piece here. So what I'd like you to do, if you can, is go and use the T-text tool on your screen. So it should be switched on for you. Yeah, you should be able to go and play with that. So if you click on the T-text tools, then what you should be able to do is just click on screen, just like Olivia has done. Well done, Olivia. Type your name and then click again and be able to reveal that to everyone. So let's get some names on screen. So Phil, thank you. Olivia, thank you. I was about to say Joe, thank you, but that's me, so that's no good. So let's make sure we've got your name on the screen. So you just need to remember to click the T-text tool, click on the screen, do your typing, and click off again. Thank you, Debbie. Catherine says, sadly, I need to leave. Oh, Catherine, but thank you for the interesting conversation. You say I've been on the receiving end of empathy and compassion when it really mattered to me. And there have been times when the opposite has been true. When compassion was shown, my levels in motivation and how valued I felt and what I wanted to deliver for that person or organisation was the polar opposite. And Phil says, thanks. Absolutely, Catherine. I've had similar experiences myself, and it comes down to what we were saying earlier on about presenteeism, about being there for the organisation, going above and beyond, and all of those other discussions. So let's have a think about what our action points are from today. So grab that T-Text tool and have a think about what it is that you are going to do after today. So it could be that you're going to be more empathetic, which would be cool, but how are you going to do those things? And whilst you're okay, so keep continuing to share some of your thoughts about what you're going to do from today. And whilst you're doing that, Phil, you had something that you wanted to pick up on from Olivia. So let's come to you first.
I've just started writing it on the whiteboard. And for me, it's about the framing that we use. So I talk about framing a lot because what we all frame all of the time. But I think we're very rarely deliberate and purposeful about the frames that we choose. And so I think, for example, talking about, so in Olivia's comment, she put, not only did I get a learning experience, but also a wee therapy session. So for me, I wouldn't frame it in that way, because I think it brings connotations and collocations, actually, that will be unhelpful for the individuals involved. For me, it's just about it's about that conversation. It's about having about listening or talking with somebody else. So for me, that's what we've done today with Olivia. We've talked with her. I know you haven't had an audible voice, Olivia, but that for me is what we've done today. Because if we start framing it as something like, say, therapy, albeit a little bit tongue in cheek, I think it creates an impression that actually makes your life harder than it needs to be. So for me, it's about choosing a simple, that's not the right word, even though I've just framed it in that way. For me, if we choose a frame like conversation, then I think that's a lot cleaner frame than therapy.
Okay, Phil, thank you very much. And I see Olivia's typing, so she will come back on that. And I think certainly I know myself, I've had feedback that sometimes where I use humour and I think I'm diffusing a situation, actually that can be framing it maybe incorrectly or with an impression that other people will get differently. And Olivia says, good point, Phil, I'm glad you took it up. It was perhaps a case of bad humour from my side. Olivia, we're in the same boat, so I appreciate that. Okay.
So for me, sorry, Joe, so I think it's not about bad humour, it's just thinking, for me it's about being that more deliberate and purposeful and think, right, what frame do I want to put around it? Because because the frame communicates additional information. So if we think more carefully about the frames that we choose, then we can think more carefully about the additional information we want to communicate. Sorry, I'm going to be quiet now.
So you just framed that really badly. You should have said, I've finished my excellent point.
Absolutely, I did frame that poorly. Because what I ended up saying was I talked to him. Anyway, I have finished my point. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Phil, for your excellent point and for demonstrating how easy it is to fall into that trap. And Nicky says in the chat, I think it's okay to say what you feel. If it put others off, so be it. Oh, don't give me that encouragement, Nicky. The world will be a much worse place. What else have we got on this reflection board? So starting at the top, somebody says, sign up to Phil's podcast. Yes, so he's got the Emotion at Work podcast. Really good, really in-depth. I must admit I'm a bit behind on some of them, but some really good discussions with experts or researchers in a field. So definitely go and look that up on your favourite podcast software. Somebody says, next one down, let's just tick these off as we go through them. I will include a wee quiet moment before I respond to anything said. And in the moment, I will activate my own empathetic skills. I think that's an absolutely awesome intention to have. And I remember having an argument actually with Mike, who's here on the chat. And we'd had a little argument where he'd pressed my buttons, I'd pressed his buttons, and it was only afterwards that we both went, you know what? If we'd both taken a moment to breathe and think about the other person, neither of us would have said those different things, and we wouldn't have ended up where we ended up. So I think that's a brilliant intention. And framing stuff, a really good lesson there. So we've got taking time to reflect and taking time with the team. That's looking really good. So Nicky, let's come to you for a kind of comment on what you're seeing here about kind of taking reflection time. I can see you're looking at mindful language and the impact you're mentioning there in the chat window. So Nicky, let me unmute you and get your thoughts on the reflections you're seeing. So Nicky, I've unmuted you. Nicky, are you there? Maybe we've lost you.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you are, Nicky.
Can you hear me?
So what are you seeing on today's action points and reflections?
I mean, I love the reflections on suspending judgment, taking time to step back and use empathy, listening with all my senses, which I think is wonderful. I think they're great reflections. And, you know, for me, listening to, what Phil was saying about frames of reference and language, which Jane mentioned as being so important. I think it is important, right? And to be important and mindful of our language, the shadow we cast, the impact on others. And it's also okay to be who we are. And if we feel that it feels like a wee therapy session that may turn people off, but if that's how you feel, it's how you feel. So I think it's a balance, Phil, a real balance between being authentic and being who you are. And if it makes someone else feel uncomfortable, we're not responsible for someone else's response. All we're responsible for is how we share, the language you use, and what we say. So it's just a bit more of a balance for me around. It might that might put some people off, but it's how you feel. It's how you feel. It's that balance.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point about being yourself and true to perhaps your own view of the world, maybe your own sense of humour, because if you have too much of editing yourself, you then don't become yourself, which is a tricky point. What else have we got going on in this reflection? We've also got things going on about work on suspending judgment. Yes, that's on that right-hand side there. Somebody says, I'm bad at that. Yeah, I completely am with you on that one. I feel pretty much the same way. Also, we've got listen with all of my senses, read the research, and listen more. Really listen to people and take a step back and use empathy. So, Stephanie, let's come to you for your thoughts on, final thoughts on what you're seeing here in the reflection.
Well, I've been reflecting on the fact that Olivia said, no matter to what degree she felt, that it was a little bit of a therapy session, because actually, Olivia, what I've sort of observed from what you've said is you did not behave or act like a victim in this. You took your own destiny back into your own hands, you made your own decisions, and you moved on. And lots of people may have felt that they didn't have the choices to do that, or weren't strong enough or confident enough to do that. So that is all to your credit. And yet, and I don't know how long ago this was, today, retelling your story again, there was still a bit more, and I'll use the phrase healing, which Phil won't like, but for you personally, you still was able to move a step further away from it. And that is a lesson, I think, to us all, because I often, a bit like my burglary story, will be in a situation where a client or a colleague is telling me something, and I am empathic about them. I do feel their pain. I have been in their situations, but I might temper that with, yeah, but haven't we all? And then we move on. So I think there was a big lesson there for me that sometimes, even if it's something that you might have heard before, or even if it's something that you've told before, that actually the fact that somebody wants to retell it again means there's still something that's needed. And so as a leader and a manager, I'm going to bear that in mind for myself.
Really good point, Stephanie. I often think, you know, if people are still talking about it, it's because they don't feel heard. So
Yeah,
thank you for that summary, Stephanie. And on the whiteboard, I'm thinking it might have been Phil that said this, but also on the whiteboard it says, 2 of my favourite phrases to help me suspend judgment. 1, there is always more going on than you think or know. And 2, it's always more complicated than that. Absolutely. So Debbie, our editor-in-chief, let's come to you for just some final thoughts before we go into our wrap-up. So Debbie, let's get you unmuted if you can, if that's still working, and final thoughts about what we've chatted today.
Well, there's been a great deal of insight. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me, Joe? Yeah. Great deal of insightful sharing of ideas. I think that the comments made about Olivia's experience have been incredibly useful. Having somebody willing to share that story for us to talk about, I think, gave this added impact. So thank you, Olivia, for that. I think all of us need to think very carefully about our actions at any time. This is as relevant to our personal lives as it is to our working lives. We have to think very carefully about how we talk to people, how they're feeling in the moment, and we probably, none of us do that enough. We're too busy to talk and to, as everybody says, give our judgment, and perhaps we should rein that in a bit more than we do.
Thank you, Debbie. Very well said, as always, as is the leader that you are, and you certainly, to me, you demonstrate that an awful lot. So thank you very much for summarising that.
My pleasure.
Okay, everybody, so thank you so much to all of our speakers today. So we have Nicky from the Learning Curve, and we also have Stephanie Morgan from Bray Leno Learning, and we have Phil Wilcox from Emotion at Work. And I think they did an absolutely marvellous job, some really interesting conversations, so thank you to all of you guys. And also thank you to everybody who attended on Twitter, who's in the chat room, who's listening now, who's listening later, because you are the people that make this conversation what it is. All of our webinars are always on our Training Journal website. You can always go and have a look at those. And you can also continue the conversation on Twitter with #TJwow. We always recommend that you go and do that. Maybe share a bit of what you have learnt. Our next webinar is all about learning transfer. It's actually a really good segue, I think, from what we're talking about today, which is all about, well, what we know, and moving into, well, how can we actually do it and make sure people are doing these things. So we do have that webinar coming up, and we're just really pleased that you have been here today, you've got involved in the conversation, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. So thank you very much, everybody. I hope you have an empathetic day and be sensitive to other people, and we look forward to chatting to you in the future.